More protests as climate change activists glue their hands to government buildings, claiming it's ignoring the science. If you were out and about in central London, you may have seen or got caught up in the disruption caused by climate change protests, calling for the end of the use of fossil fuels now. It comes after the government published its new energy strategy last week. Today, Extinction Rebellion took their message directly to the Department for Business, with some gluing themselves to the building. Well, we can join our reporter Alice Bandukravi, who's in Trafalgar Square. And Alice, you've been following developments.
That's right, Riz. Well, Trafalgar Square now is full of the usual visitors and tourists, but earlier on it was a stopping point for those Extinction Rebellion protesters as they made their way through central London as part of this week of action, as they're calling it. We'll be hearing from them shortly, but first, here's a roundup of what they've been up to. Welcome to the April Rebellion, XR's latest offensive in the name of climate change. Some of the tactics are the same. Marches, protesters and direct action, like today at the headquarters of Shell on the South Bank, where activists blockaded the entrance, glued themselves to the reception desk and even got into the offices.
I'm just making a film, I'm documenting the protests throughout the building.
But they're also employing more novel strategies to bring the wider public round to their cause through engagement and dialogue. All over London, small groups of climate campaigners have been knocking on doors, like these ones in Old Street. Their aim is to listen and talk directly to the public at large about their concerns. Whilst some ignored the doorsteppers, others were sympathetic, agreeing that they too were concerned about climate change.
I do feel hopeless. What can I do? I've got my little garden, I do my recycling, but it's not enough. How much billions and billions of people do you need to do what I'm doing to make a change? I think it's got to come from the government, because most people listen to the government, you know, MPs, Parliament, all that stuff.
Others disagreed with XR's approach.
I don't have much sympathy for the Extinction Rebellion because I think they're too ideologically based. People can't afford to eat, and then they can't afford to go to work because the price of fuel is too high, and then they're stopped actually going to work by protests. I personally think it could be very dangerous, you know.
The protests outside the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy were peaceful today, halfway through this week of civil disobedience by XR. Well, I'm joined now by Claire Farrell, one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion. Thank you for joining us this evening. Londoners are getting somewhat used to the disruption, but it doesn't make it easier for people. What would you say to people watching and feeling aggrieved that actually you're closing roads and people need to get on with life?
I would say that myself and other people have been told in courts by the public and by the media that we should target carbon because that's what's causing climate change. So there are lots of people at the moment taking action against the oil sector with Just Stop Oil, and some Extinction Rebellion activists taking protests to oil refineries. XR also was founded on the principle of doing civil disobedience in the capital city because it gets the media attention and because it's easy to join. So we're using a diversity of tactics, and I think we're being far less disruptive to the public than we have been in the past.
You did, as we saw in that report, go into the Department of Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng. He has hit out this afternoon in response to that. He has said, "You cannot and we won't switch off domestic oil and gas production." He says doing so would put energy security, jobs and industries at risk and would simply increase foreign imports, not reduce demand. Are you put off by that very clear message?
Well, it contradicts what he's said in public in the past, actually, which is that our domestic sources of oil and gas don't have any implication on British energy security. So, as I understand it, we don't have guaranteed access to any of the oil or gas that comes out of the North Sea. It's all owned by companies or foreign governments. That means that expanding production in those places doesn't actually help our energy security. We need to transition. People want a fast transition. The public are very clear in their polling. They want to stop reliance on fossil fuels, and they want to solve the energy crisis, the price crisis and the climate crisis all at once, and that is what his job should be.
I was out with some of your campaigners yesterday, knocking on doors, hearing from people as part of this new strategy to engage the public. But going out and taking direct action, and as you say, doing it for the media attention, is not going to win over hearts and minds, is it?
Well, so far it's built us an enormous worldwide movement, and just in the last week there's been an enormous number. I think over 1,000 scientists have gone out and broken the law en masse last week altogether, because they're reaching a desperate point, because they're shouting as loud as they can do and nobody's listening and no one's acting, so they feel they have to resort to that. The same with doctors and nurses being arrested on a bridge the other day. The leading sort of people in the police force were in tears arresting them. This is what it's come to.
And finally, what do we need to brace ourselves for the rest of this week of action?
Extinction Rebellion will continue to march through the streets. There will be some disruption. There will also be a lot of outreach. So we're mobilising like we never have before. This is a universal issue, and I hope everyone can come out on Saturday at 10 o'clock.
Claire Farrell, thank you very much for your time. And of course, we will be covering any of that disruption as it happens.